The interior is interesting because I think Tomlinson's crazy because I get that everyone thinks he sucks, and I get that Trent Williams probably made him look better than he probably is in San Francisco. But starting all but one game since 2017 is insane for a number of reasons. But if he's really as bad as they say, then it's crazy that he's just remained in starting lineups. So I think that's one thing to keep an eye on. The Ingram thing is basically a Kenyon Green wash, where if you think that change of scenery is going to help Kenyon Green, maybe you're hoping the same thing for Ed Ingram. And then the Trent Brown thing I think is interesting because 3 years ago, whatever it was, 4 years ago, that was probably the name that the Texans most wanted fans. That was one of the most popular names for the Texans to sign. He ended up signing with the Raiders, and a couple years later, he's on the streets. So my question when we get into these interior offensive linemen, if you're not pleased with what they've done, my question would be, what was the alternative to what they did with the OL so far? And obviously, like, I think the most popular thing would be don't trade Laramie Tunsil. If you're in that camp, don't trade Laramie Tunsil. I can understand that. But I think in a crazy way, because the other popular thing would be, well, we should have signed some big name free agents. We should have signed a big name tackle. We should have signed a big name guard. We should have spent money. But in a crazy way, the guys that they brought in who are flawed, they've been exposed as flawed after they were the guys that perhaps we're talking about. Because often when you sign big names in free agency, 2 years later, those guys are on the streets. Like Trent Brown, I think, is on his third team since he signed that deal. Laken Tomlinson since San Francisco, he's on his third team since he signed that deal. So I think it's dangerous to think that the alternative to what they've done would be just going out there and signing free agents. And I know that there's some popular names and maybe guys on one-year deals, but I do think in a crazy way, these flawed guys are kind of symbolic of the dangers, the lack of production, the lack of return on investment when it comes to these guys.
The Trent Brown conversation is interesting to me because it feels like he's like the gatekeeper for the offensive line. Brown tore his patellar tendon last year for the Bengals, and that's a very serious injury. We've talked about the patellar tendon thing when it comes to Ohio State prospect Josh Simmons, who is thought to be first-round talent at tackle, but he had a patellar tendon tear last year. That's the same thing Brown's dealing with, and he got hurt in week 3. And so if he's ready for training camp, it's kind of a medical miracle, but he should see something back, from a production standpoint. He should see that back down a little bit. So he kind of feels to me like the gatekeeper. You got to be better than Trent Brown to be on this team and play tackle. And there's some familiarity, obviously, there. A couple of stints with the Patriots. And the Patriots traded for him in 2018, and then they went on and won the Super Bowl with him playing left tackle. He went to the Raiders, like you mentioned. As soon as the Raiders were done with him, boom, the Patriots signed him right back up, had him playing all over the place, right tackle, a little bit of left tackle. So he's sort of that gatekeeper guy. And I wonder if Ingram and Tomlinson are both also gatekeeper level players where, hey, if you're better than those guys, we'll probably start you, or you're for sure on the team. And if you're not as good as those guys, see you later. The one that I feel like people probably have the most reaction to is Cam Robinson because of the financial commitment to him. And it's like, well, could you have spent Cam Robinson's money on a guard and felt better about one of the two guard spots versus feeling good about the tackle spot? Not to say that everybody feels good, but could you have felt good about one guard spot for 1 year versus how you feel about the tackle spot? Because Cam Robinson, he's only played left tackle in the NFL. He has played more left tackle than probably anybody on this roster right now, including Trent Brown. So Cam Robinson is experienced. There are elements of his game that are big positives. There are elements of his game that are not good. He's also been in some really crappy situations. Like, we talk about this with players all the time. Well, God, you end up in Cleveland. That place has been a disaster for 3 decades. Well, you end up in Jacksonville. That place has been a disaster for like 10 years now. It's like, if he gets in a better situation, could he be a little bit better player? Could you fine-tune some things about his game? And then it really kind of sets the tone for all the guys who had Texans uniforms last year. Okay, these are the guys you got to beat out. These are the guys you got to be better than. And if I was Titus Howard, Landry, I'd be sitting here and I look at this roster I have a hard time finding me a spot. So I better come in ready to work and ready to take care of business if I'm still on the Texans when training camp gets here.
Yeah, the other thing about it with what they've done is I don't think anyone should feel good about this offensive line at all.
No.
Matter of fact, you should be terrified. Like you should be terrified of this offensive line. And I think even the best case scenario, and I don't like, maybe we can get ahead of ourselves if we want, but I don't know whether you want to. I know we're going to try to connect this to the draft in some way, shape, or form because we're about a month away from draft time, most magical time of the year. By the way, we're going to try to figure out something to do, some sort of gathering on Saturday, day 3. We're going to be live streaming the first 2 days, but we're going to try to figure out something for sure, 100%. So stay on the lookout for that. But even I think if this works out, like best case scenario, let's say everything awesome that can happen happens. And every like potential positive or ceiling is met with Robinson, Tomlinson, Ingram, Brown, and then I'll throw Blake Fisher in there because we haven't seen him play, and that's obviously the one that you have the most long-term investment in. Your long-term offensive line issues are going to be the exact same next year. Like this is not a long-term fix by any stretch of the imagination. So even the best case scenario for what they've brought in is that you're able to kind of plug the flood before it kind of bursts out because you're still not feeling great about your long term. The things that could happen for you to feel a little better would be Juice Scruggs starts looking like they think he looks like. If Jared Patterson gets a chance, he does. And most importantly, Blake Fisher looks good. But these moves, like, make no mistake about it, best case scenario, this is just kind of holding things together for a year.
Yeah, Robinson, Tomlinson, Ingram, and Brown are all 1-year deals. Like Ingram's got 1 year left on his deal. Tomlinson was a 1-year signing, and so was Brown and Robinson. Those are all just it's like you said, it's plugs on a leaky part of this team. Obviously, if you're talking about scenarios that could, if Juice Scruggs somehow turned into a worthwhile guard, and you had Patterson, Scruggs, and Fisher hold down 3 of the 5 spots, that's long-term like stability in 3 of the 5 spots. But really, as you kind of look at this thing, if you're talking about from the long term, you're just hoping Fisher and one of the 2 centers hold something down and that there's people knocking on the door at the other spots post-draft. Because you don't want to be 6 weeks into the season and re-signing Cam Robinson for 2026. You don't want to be thinking about Ed Ingram or Laken Tomlinson in 2026. You want these guys to get in here, do what they do in 2025. Hopefully somebody plays well enough they don't even make the team. Or if they make the team, you've got somebody that's ready at the end of the year to sort of cycle them out, and then you get the new bottom of the roster type guys.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing is, man, Blake Fisher's got to be able to beat out one of these guys. And it's got to be a fair beat out. Not this guy looks like Matt Khalil type of beat out. Like, Blake Fisher has got to win the battle at right tackle. Like, he's got to look a lot better than he did last year. He's got to look more comfortable. He's got to look stronger. Like, that's the thing that you really, really, really want to happen, because they invested pretty decently in Blake Fisher and it was a proactive move, and you just hope that starts to pay off. So that's, as far as the long term, I think that's extremely important.
They pretty much drafted Blake Fisher for the scenario that played out in 2024 is, hey, we might need him this year because these guys have injury histories and we're maybe not sure about some of these spots. And then we're definitely going to need him in 2025. And that was among, I'm not going to say it was the first, but that was among one of the first day 2 tackles taken. And the run started after that. So Caserio started the run. And some of these other guys, they haven't been very good. Like the Chiefs couldn't put their guy on the field. The Suamataya from BYU, they couldn't put him on the field. Coleman and Wallace from the Commanders and the Patriots, okay. Roger Rosengarten was thought to be pro-ready from Washington last year. Texans picked Fisher because he had a higher upside. Well, you got to hope you see it in 2025. You got too many moving parts to have one of the guys you're sort of betting on You don't want Trent Brown playing right tackle coming off a torn patellar tendon. That's not what you want. Trent Brown's there as break glass in case of emergency. Trent Brown's not brought in to start. So, like, if we're sitting here and it's, the middle of August, we're like, God, they got to start Trent Brown at right tackle. Like, get ready, CJ. Hope you worked on the wheels.